will go ahead and just start the presentation, and this is going to be recorded for families to view later. So if you have any follow-up questions or would like to obtain the information, that should be available for you by your counselors. But thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sarah Kolaski. I am the Regional Director of Admissions for Sacred Heart University. I recruit students in the West and Midwestern regions of the United States. So I work directly with this population, and there are a lot of counselors like myself. This presentation is partially and part of help from our regional group. It's called the Regional Admission Counselors of California. So there are over 170 members who represent institutions out of state and are living either in California or in the Western region. So being a direct point of contact for you. But today we're going to talk about creating the college essay. We'll dive a little bit into some other topics surrounding writing samples and other sort of those qualitative assessments that would be considered within your application as well, and kind of helping you stand out with such a personalized approach that you can have something besides just the general application being submitted, and being able to advocate for yourself in a way that will only support you moving forward. So get started here. So college essay, why is it important? So this, as I kind of was talking about, this is something that allows students to really add a personalized piece, kind of go beyond what is reflected in your transcript, and give you a chance to talk about something that you're either really passionate about or something that is something that you want to be addressed that isn't necessarily covered fully in your application. So there are a lot of different approaches with the essay. There are a lot of different essays I've seen, and I can say that there's no right or wrong way to approach it, but we want to give you a little bit of insight and some tips to help you out and make sure that you're doing it in the way that's going to make you stand out, in the way that makes you more of a competitive candidate in those processes. So types of writings that colleges see. So we do have either some short essays, we have a personal statement. This is probably the most common. You'll most likely, all students will have some type of personal statement that they will fill out. Supplemental questions will depend based on the university, based on what they would like you to answer, on top of everything else that you've provided within your application. We also have the additional information section, which is meant more as a place to provide some context regarding maybe your academic performance, or if you had any disruptions during your time in high school that had sort of a conflicting or just it's more telling of the story overall of like what is going on during your time in high school, and just providing that additional context for the counselor, especially if they are going to provide a holistic review. And then in the coming cycles too, one additional piece for that information section is something that has been added by Common Application, and I believe the UC application is our COVID-19 related information. Again, if your family was impacted one way or another throughout your time in high school, we've seen a lot of students kind of talk about their experience with remote learning, how it impacted their grades. So again, really providing those personalized details to make you stand out and help the counselor better understand your situation and how you're going to move forward or grow and progress in a way as you're starting to think about college and those next steps. And any students who are considering any sort of performing arts, visual arts programs, or creative writing, though there are sometimes either extra applications or artistic portfolios that students might be requested to submit to provide additional context for those particular review processes. So I think it's really important to just be in touch with your counselor. As I mentioned, with a lot of us being regional, you can be in touch and see what are those requirements, what are those things that do stand out, and making sure that you have all of your your boxes checked when you're submitting your applications. And then just general communications, day to day. So and this is going to depend from school to school, but if a school does track demonstrated interest, there might be a chance that they're, taking a look at your emails. If you had it written a personalized letter, I know that's not as common as it used to be, but I still have some of those handwritten notes from students a few years ago who sent me a handwritten note after their either a tour on campus or an interview with me or anything like that. So there are definitely a lot of different pieces of writing that will, again, help provide a sense of who you are, and again, personalizing that process. So all of these do have some type of influence one way or another. And an essay is an opportunity for you. So this is a chance, and I know applying to colleges is going to essentially be another class. But again, I think this is a great time to really reflect on what you've done in high school, what your goals are moving forward, and really highlight anything that hasn't been covered or you want to kind of dive in a little bit deeper with regards to your application. We know as 17, 18-year-olds, there hasn't been maybe these monumental experiences that you've happened, but again, if it's something that has impacted you, we want to hear about it. So we want to, again, provide that subjective lens for you for a moment, because admissions is a whole approach is through that objective mind to really, again, show who's are going to be great fits on our respective campuses and help you identify that college fit down the line. I know it's also it's a little bit of a hard switch, because you're probably so used to a lot of academic writing and critical thinking and critical writing, and this is the first opportunity really you get a chance to humbly brag about yourself and really get to advocate for yourself in a way that you may not have had the opportunity to do so yet, because the first time you're really turning the lens in your direction. So there's a lot of, again, opportunities to really support you in that path. These are going to be the common application essay prompts this year. So students do have, if you apply to any common application school, there are about 650 member colleges that utilize Common App. So this is something that you will, again, you'll submit all of this information once. So this personal statement is actually submitted to every college with whom you select for the Common App. So it's important to think about what type of topic you want to cover. These are the 7 topics. Really, again, highlighting your own personal attributes. Maybe you want to highlight a specific extracurricular activity, or maybe you had a really strong role model in your life and you had a lot of inspiration come from that, and you want to talk about what you've done as a result of those inspirations. But really, again, we really want to see your personal growth one way or another. There's no right or wrong topic to cover. One of my favorite tips, I think, with essay prompts like this is if you're able to tell me kind of the whole story in the first and last sentences of your essay, and I've learned something, that's a really strong essay. So really taking the time to think about what topic resonates with you and how you want to best reflect those personal qualities to your admissions rep and have that little piece stand out. And we'll talk a little bit briefly about our UC essay prompts. They're called PIQs. There are 8 different questions. So it's similar to the Common App, where you'll have a couple prompts to choose from, but you'll choose 4 of the 8 questions to respond to. And the topics are pretty similar to the Common App, where they're asking you to kind of talk a little bit about your creative side, or something that really stood out in your academic experience, and how did you decide to continue a certain part of your academia that was an interest of yours, or how you overcame a challenge. So again, these very similar topics, but the difference is they're going to be a maximum of 350 words. So these are really short, concise, direct answers to some a little invested questions, and just seeing again how you kind of translate that critical thinking and that self-reflection into a whole picture that the counselor will again be able to evaluate and see on your application. Again, it's completely to your discretion to decide on whatever question you'd like, or questions you'd like to work on. This applies to both the PIQs and the Common App. But just do something that is, again, going to really help you stand out in that process, and really highlight the things that you want the counselor to be aware of, in order to evaluate you with that scope. And then we have some supplemental questions. Again, this is going to vary from school to school. Some schools may have them, some may not, but they're going to be most likely a little bit more site specific to that university. So whether it's what's something that stood out, or if they have a certain tradition that they want you to kind of look into more, or something, again, that's going to be a little bit more specific in identifying college fit, something that's going to really help the counselors understand, okay, are they going to really contribute to our community in the way that we want them to, and kind of against, and again, for schools that do look into demonstrated interest, it does provide a little bit more of an accurate depiction of who's likely to enroll for us as well. So we definitely can tell when you take the time to invest in supplemental questions about this. Some really great examples are if you had visited that school, or you had connected with a faculty member or a current student who shared their experiences, and it aligned with something that you're really interested in, whether academically or environmentally or socially, and talking about those little personalized details are a great way to answer some of these supplemental questions. We really want you to broaden your scope here too. And I know it's a little bit more work, but we will be able to see if it is something that was already featured in your Common App essay or your PIQs. So take that time, take the time as much as you would take the time to invest in your own personal statement. Just because they might be a little bit shorter, or they might be a little bit more direct on what they're looking for in that frame of mind. It is something that we can tell whether or not you're investing the work and actually wanting to take that application process seriously. But it is a great way for counselors to, again, allow students another personalized piece to that process. And here are some examples. I kind of gave them as I was chatting through that, but some of them can be really also kind of really outliers. I think I had one essay that I read that was like they just asked the question why, and really went really let the students have that creative outlet to share their own thoughts and their own perspective. So again, really diving in a little bit more, and I think it is something that depending on what types of questions they ask, it can be a little bit of a reprieve and giving you another outlet to share share a unique side of your personality, or share more about yourself that you weren't able to do in other parts of the application. So, and with that, I'm going to pass it to Lori, who's my co-presenter, and talk a little bit more about other writing samples.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks so much for leading the presentation and holding it down. Appreciate it so much. So really quickly, I'm Lori from CU Boulder. We read a fair amount of applications and essays, so I love to talk about this subject. So one of the things that students and applicants do not realize is that we are human beings on the other end of this process. And beyond just being your admission evaluators or administrators of this process, we're receiving and seeing all of the pieces of writing in one way or another that you're going to be using to communicate with us. So let's start with some of them on the application. On the Common Application, there is a additional information section, and now post-COVID, there is a COVID information section. These are ways for you to give us context about your path to your high school degree that are not best served by writing about it in a narrative persuasive short form essay. So for example, if you are trying to explain, for example, how a concussion in junior year impacted a part of your semester, that might not be the best subject for a essay, because it may not give us as much insight into how your character forms and how you make choices, but it's really important for understanding what happened. So you can just, in those sections of the COVID section or the additional information section, you can very straightforward and more of a short answer, direct way, address and explain what happened and explain what the solution or the next steps were. In addition to the overall application, you may also have additional programmatic requirements. So, for example, an artistic portfolio or or a sample of work. So when you are putting this together, you also want to think about how you're presenting yourself and how it corresponds with and adds onto your overall application. Those things are not looked at separately, where the application is ignored and the portfolio is paid attention to. So you want to make sure that your portfolio operates and is sort of like an extension of your overall application and works within it instead of seeming disjointed or out of step with the overall application. Then emails, texts, and letters and notes. Some things that students are not aware of is that very often, even when you're getting like quote unquote a like broadly sent text message or a broadly sent email, most likely, if you ever respond to that text message or that email or that message, there's going to be a human being on the other end where that response ends up in their inbox directly. And sometimes that person texting you is either a current student or an entry-level staff member, people who are new in that part of their career, or are current students. So you want to be very careful about the way that you're conducting yourselves in response to those messages. Sometimes students will text back and they think it's just like a do not respond text message, and then it's actually a message that they wouldn't have wanted a current student to see. And not only does that current student have that message, but it's permanently attached to that applicant's application file. So make sure that when you're communicating through emails, texts, letters, notes, any sort of correspondence, responding to a big message or a small one, conduct yourself in a way that you would want attached to your application, because it most likely will end up attached to your application. Next slide, please. So there are some common topics that we do traditionally see when we are reading applications. The reason why this is under the common topics titling is because there's no way for us to tell you, all the teenagers of America, necessarily, there are things you just absolutely should not write about no matter what. There is going to be a student with a really great essay in every single one of these. Maybe not the broad conclusions, but in most of these, there's going to be a student with a great essay because it's suited to that person, it's suited to the application, they've really given that thought. But because these are such common topics, we want to point out some of the pitfalls, not to dissuade you from anything in here, but so that you can actually make it work for you. So the most important thing about a common topic essay, like say the sports travails, 30 seconds on the clock, final game, senior year, shots up to you, is that it's giving us a lot of chronological detail, potentially, but we do not actually learn anything about how you would respond to or operate, or like why you make the choices that you do. By taking us through a play-by-play of what happened, you're relying upon us to make the same assumptions that you would to understand what that meant to you. As a different person, I'm not going to hear that story or that play-by-play and be like, oh, definitely, I know what you mean. I completely understand what you're trying to convey. So you want to make sure that you're taking it deeper into actually helping me understand from the character out instead of from the happening in. When you come to certain topics like broad conclusions or preaching, you are talking to a lot of different people in these applications. People you are talking to about these subjects may have actually literally written their theses on these subjects, or maybe personally interested in them, or have strong personal conclusions. Beyond that, though, when you're writing your essay about preaching or trying to argue a point, again, it's talking about something outside of yourself. You're talking about something that, because of what you value and what you care about and all of that internal stuff, you've ended up at that place. But I'm trying to understand the beginning part, the inside stuff, the values, the character, and not so much where it has taken you, but where that started, so they can understand what you would do if presented with opportunities at my school. And then lastly, things like community service or travel. A lot of times these essays will be using other people, for example, sometimes in the parents' essay, as avatars for what you want us to understand about you. That is kind of dehumanizing, especially when you're talking about traveling to places with a different quality of life or doing community service with people from different populations. So you want to be very careful, because you are talking in that case about humans as object lessons. But you also want to understand that even if you're talking about someone in a fully respectful way, you're then describing somebody else and giving a biography of them hoping that I will interpret that as like, therefore, those are the things you value. I'm not learning anything about why you value it or why it applies to you, and I end up wanting to admit that person you talk about. So make sure you're actually explaining how it relates back to you. Gina, feel free to clarify in the chat if you want me to clarify some of that. I appreciate you giving me the feedback, but I'd love to know a little bit more about what you'd like me to clarify. While I'm waiting for that, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so here are some things that you do definitely want to avoid. Like I mentioned before on the other screen, do not assume that everyone is going to have the same opinions and experiences. In conversation, when we're speaking to face, we've got nonverbal and verbal communication, and we can say, you know what I mean. It is very difficult to have that sort of understanding carry on through. We want it to be inside out. And if you're using examples like people to describe values, what you're doing is outside in. You're hoping that someone outside of you will explain what's going on inside of you. So when you're writing this, you do not want to be relying upon expressing your point by relying upon someone just understanding what you mean or sharing your viewpoint. That also misses the chance to go deeper and explain why that is important to you. You also want to make sure that you have feedback in this process. Not only is someone going to read your essay, maybe catch an awkward turn of phrase, or maybe going to notice that it doesn't translate to the reader in the way that you meant, but you also want to take a break from what you're writing, have the ability to get some feedback, give your brain a little bit of space with the work before you go back to it. So having someone review it who hasn't seen it from the beginning is a good way to do that. Another thing you've got to be aware of is remove school names when going to multiple institutions. I am not going to deny somebody because they put Colorado State University within the personal statement essay. I know Elise at Colorado State. She and I get along great. But what I am going to know is that somebody writing that essay, trying to attend college, did not put in the time to fact check that, to even look at that. So that indicates the work level to me that you have put in on that. And so you don't want to raise those questions when they didn't exist. And then lastly, kind of following from that, don't forget the basics, review grammar and content. I'm going to be putting in a significant amount of hours from November 15th through like the middle of March reading applications. So try to give it the same level of work ethic that I'm going to be putting in, because I want to understand that this is as important to you as it is to me, the application reader. Next question, or next slide. Thanks. So this slide, I just want you to see how some of these mistakes read, especially when it comes to spelling and grammar. The last thing you want to have happen is when I'm reading 50 or 60 applications in a day, for your applications to stick out because I'm not really sure whether or not your family likes to kill your neighbors. You know, I am going to assume that the answer to that is a definitive no, but do you really want to raise that flag and sort of interrupt the train of my reading and throw that in there and have that stick out being like, so weird. You think they would have copy edited that? You know, don't make yourself stick out in a way that isn't going to bring you any favors. Make sure that you are just giving yourself the leg up of having everything polished and put together. Next slide. So some tips to remember, and then I'm going to show you an example of how we actually can do that show, not tell piece of advice. Okay, so you want to engage the reader. The way that you're going to do that is by writing about something you care about. If you don't want to write about it, we're not going to really want to read about it because it's not going to come across as if you really wanted to be there. So when you're thinking about your topics, again, going back to don't rely upon us all having the shared same experiences, you can't predict what I'm going to be passionate about reading. All you can do is choose the thing you would actually really want to write about. And actually going with that, that'll also be more likely to actually read well because you cared about writing it. Make sure that you're not spending too much time on like the chronological details or setting the scene, because you want to make sure that you're giving yourself space to talk about you. If you're taking 400 words to demonstrate your command of allegory and, simile, that is not what the point of the work is. I'm going to assume from your English grades that you are good at English, and from those recommendations and everything like that, I want to get to the point of the essay. And you have to, while writing, be aware of word count, because you don't want to find that you're constantly running up against not getting the most important points in because you've given so much backstory. Now, consider also essays from our perspective. So that's really talking about that grammar, that content, having somebody else copy edit it. We're going to be seeing a lot of essays. That does not mean that we do not care about the essays. What it means is you don't want to sort of throw like a rock into the gears when we're reading that. And you can really easily avoid doing that by taking time to edit, taking time to copy edit, and getting that feedback. And then show us, not tell us, so that we can learn much more about you and also get to the facts without totally missing some of the details. Now that seems like a lot to ask. For the next slide, I'm going to give you an example of what we mean by that. So on the top are the tells and on the bottom are the shows. So I did mention, make sure you get to the point, don't put in too much detail, but you want to give us enough detail so that it's not just like, I am good with people. How do I know? Because I am. You want to give us a little bit more. So for example, on the example on the right, I think it's on my screen, the dance example. This example is giving enough chronological backstory to move through to the actual point. So 3 sentences, actually 2 sentences, we have now set the scene. We understand that the student is good at dance, but we're about to get to the actual point, which is what's going on, what's the moment in time or the happenings in time that help us understand the student's character and viewpoint. And it also, for example, on the left, if you're a student who wants to be a little bit more verbose or wants to put in a little bit more description, the example on the left can show you how to do that without, again, getting overwhelmed by too many details. All right, next slide. So we're coming to the end here. Just in conclusion, consider your essay in the context of your entire application. We are going to be reviewing your application in total. By this point in your high school career, if you're approaching or in senior year, most of that application has been set. You've earned those grades, you've done those activities, you have formed those relationships that are on your letters of recommendation. So this is your opportunity to share your voice and actually put some perspective through that essay. Give us something to keep in mind as we are reading and interpreting all of that information. By making the point of your application you and helping us grow deeper and learn more about you, the thing you actually can control in terms of telling us, that will give us the ability to guesstimate, to predict what you would do with the opportunities at our school. We're experts at our school. We know the opportunities, but we don't understand before you tell us that X factor, which is how you would react to things based upon who you are and what you would do with them based upon who you are. So lastly, try to enjoy the process. I know it can be a lot. It is a little bit daunting to try to think about doing this slowly, piece by piece over time instead of doing it right before the deadline. But I promise you, as a student who didn't take this advice in her first time around, it's a lot easier if you just commit to the process a little bit, trust it, and let it unfold for you. All right, I think now we are going to get to questions.
Yes, and I saw some come through, so I can start at the beginning. So the first question was, any input on how vulnerable a student should be in their essay? Could sharing something about their mental health journey during high school be viewed as negative?
I think it really depends. I think that if you're writing an essay, and for certain students, it's like, okay, this is the moment in time. This is where I process this, and there's a reason to it. Then put it in there. But I think what happens for a lot of students is this feeling that you have to trade personal pain or vulnerability for college admissions. Like, I need to explain to them how difficult things were in this moment so that they will then admit me. And that's not actually fair to you as the applicant, or necessarily useful to us in terms of what we're trying to learn. We're not trying to learn that you survive difficulty. As human beings, we care. But in terms of what the essay is meant to do, it's meant to help us understand how you react or process, like what you would do in a situation. You can't give us your DNA, your blueprint of your soul, but you can say this one thing I think is really important for them to know about me. So I'm going to use the 600 words to demonstrate it. If it leads into that story, great. But if it doesn't, you don't have to trade that in order to get into college.
I agree. And I think, again, it's something that if we feel there's been that growth and closure where you have an understanding that of that processing, because otherwise it's something where it could become a concern where if we have any sort of indicators that the student is not doing well, or like there might be an opportunity we have to connect with like our own counselors on campus or connect with the family to see if the student is ready for college. It's not something we want students to hide any of that vulnerabilities, but understanding how to approach it is going to make a big difference. Just for the sake of time, because we have some questions coming through. So about dealing with COVID personally. So as we mentioned, in the first half of the presentation, there is going to be a section specifically for COVID. Do not write your personal essay about COVID because everyone has dealt with COVID. There is going to be an allotted section just for your experience for it. And we know there's a lot more that, as kind of Lori said earlier, where we all face these difficulties as humans, and we want to see how you progress. So we want to take that time to allow you to highlight some other parts of your personality and your life. So the next question is the purpose of the college essay to show our personality and character. Yes. Yes, be as creative, be as open. I love to really hear students' voices through their writing. So don't be afraid to let that shine, because there's a lot of great things about everybody that we want to see. So please do take that opportunity to highlight those attributes. Does an essay, an early decision versus regular decision make a difference?
I'm not sure about the question exactly, because an application and its requirements are the same for EA and RD. So if you have to submit an application with an essay for regular decision, you'd also have to do the same thing for early action and vice versa. So
yes.
Yeah.
And then is COVID even worth mentioning, since it was horrible for everyone? Again, so the reason we have the additional information and now the COVID-19 related section, it helps paint the picture for us. For a lot of our schools who do a holistic review, and if we say we see a drop in GPA sophomore year because you happen to switch to remote learning, that's important to us. Just because it's not going to be the storytelling piece that you would think it would be, doesn't mean that it didn't impact you. It's going to be just as important as the student telling us whether or not they have a late diagnosed learning disability, or if they had to transfer schools because their parents' job switched, or they had to anything along those lines that's going to provide a picture of a disruption in your high school career is going to be important. So while I highly encourage you not to write your personal essay about it, please write about it if it's something that did impact you in such a way that it helps us put a puzzle piece out there and really put that picture together. And those are all the how much is an essay weighted compared to other criteria? Can it be a deal breaker or deal maker?
Yes and no. I think applicants think that in order to better understand this process, I think that a lot of us make assumptions that everything is quantified. Like even the non-quantifiable parts, we like assign a number to it. That's not exactly how it works. If essays can definitely make or break an application though. So I read an application and the essay is a huge red flag. Yeah. But if I'm on the fence and I get context and understanding from the essay, then that can also push it the other way.
Great questions. I think we have time for one more. I just want to be mindful of everybody's time. So if anyone has a final question they want to throw into the chat. Okay, so I had one come through. Do you score essay and colleges use cutoffs? I think this was similar in terms of how the essay will be weighted. Every institution is going to have their own internal review process, and whether they do it on a numerical scale or they do it on some type of qualitative, including context, grammar, semantics, things like that. It's going to vary from school to school and how much they do weigh it, but it is something, again, that can make or break a decision. And I think that's important to note, just again, making sure that you're taking the time and effort to invest in the college essay, because it is something, while we spend a few minutes just reading it, we know that we can tell the difference between one that is just rushed versus one that has been developed over time. So really give yourself the time and the energy to put forth through that. And I think that about wraps it up, but thank you all for attending tonight. We hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions, I actually will put our contact information up there. Please don't hesitate to contact us directly, and also utilize regionaladmissions.com. It is something that is a great resource for you. A lot of our counselors live in San Diego or in the greater California area, so you have people ready to help you through this whole process. But thank you again. And Lori, any final thoughts?
Just really honestly, take us at what we're saying at face value. I think a lot of people are trying to like look behind the curtain and figure out like, oh, what are they really saying behind what they're saying? We're saying exactly what we mean. Yeah, so trust us, take us as resources, ask us the questions that we have. We are people who have been through this process and work with people who go through this process and want this to go well for you.
All right, thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah.